You're listening to the Intrepid radio program with Scotty Roberts. Intelligent talk.
Hey, happy Friday, folks. This is Scotty Roberts. You're listening to my show, the Intrepid radio program, right here on the Odyssey Radio Network. That's ODYSY1.com. Come on over, see all the goodness that's Odyssey Radio. Find all the places where you can hear this show in its archived format. You can go to places like iTunes, Spreaker, iHeartRadio, and you can tune in this show anytime you want. At the same time, come on over to my YouTube channel and watch the video simulcast of this show and join the live chat room, which is going on right now as I'm speaking, as you're listening, as you're watching. You might, if you're watching, you're probably part of that chat room, but come on over and join the other fellow Intrepids. Talk about tonight's topic or whatever you want over there. There's a good cadre of good people, good friends over there to make. And you know what? We don't all think alike, but we all do appreciate each other. So that's a good place to go and find some good place for conversation and some good friends to make. Again, I'm belaboring that point, but that's over my YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. And Mr. all spelled out. All right, so I want to thank you for joining me here tonight. It's Friday. It's the end of the week. I should be doing something ghosty or paranormal, or I should finish as I promised last night's show. We spent 2 nights talking about the Q source in the New Testament. But I don't want to go into that tonight. I want to do something fresh and different tonight. Well, maybe it's not so fresh, but maybe it's different tonight than last night. I know a few people were confused that it was the same show as the night before last night. At least 2 people. And I said, no, this is just part 2 of last night. And so I think we covered a lot of what this Q source was. So let's leave it there for a minute and move into some other things. And something I want to talk about is something that I have been posting about. I use my social media, my Facebook page, to sometimes post some things to get people to react, to get people to communicate, to talk, and find out what people are thinking. Sometimes I like what people are saying. Other times I think, you are a buffoon. But I always try to treat people with respect. Now, I saw a quote of the late Justice Antonin Scalia, who said, I attack ideas, I don't attack people. Some very good people have some very bad ideas. Now, you can take a quote like that and say, but then who's to gauge what's a bad idea or what's a good idea? Who's a good person versus a bad person? So I put that up because that's the way I like to approach all this stuff, especially with all the divisiveness over the election and the outcome of the election and the ongoing debate and challenge to the election. And Joe Biden will probably end up being the president of the United States, but I still think that there are definitive is not the word. There are things that need to be looked at, and that's why I think Trump is challenging the election. Then you get people that will come along and render an opinion, well, he's just a narcissist, so he has to. And this is what he does. I think it's more than that, guys. I really do. And so I try not to go there. But I put up something this yesterday where there is I think he's a representative, a state representative, David Atkins. And I think he's California, but I might be mistaken. It's not here in front of me, so I don't have that information. But he said this on his Twitter page. No, seriously, how do surrounded by asterisks, how do you deprogram 75 million people? Where do you start? Fox? Facebook? Or we have to start thinking in terms of post-World War II Germany or Japan or the failures of Reconstruction in the South. That was his post. So he's talking about deprogramming. The 75 million people he's talking about is, of course, Trump voters, which is pushing probably closer to 80 million. And so you look at that, and I see friends of mine that are liberal and are on the left that disagree with me politically, opposite ends of the political spectrum, and they come in and they make their comments about that. And their comments, I think, are so... I look at them and I read them and I say, that's so one-sided. Here you're talking about, you believe that you've just elected a man into office who will bring peace to us all. He will end the divisiveness of our nation and our people. And but the only way for them to see the divisiveness being ended is to eradicate the 75 million or deprogram the 75 million who voted the other way, which is about half the nation, probably more than half the nation. This is what's being challenged right now. So when you look at that, my big question for the night, just so you know where I'm going with this, is going to be, what do you do when you disagree over politics or things that are of importance to you with a friend or another person or a family member? How do you handle that? What do you do with that stuff? I look at this, and I had one friend of mine, I've known him for a while, he's an artist friend of mine, an outstanding artist, and he says, I do think the comparison to the failure of Reconstruction has some merit. We did have half the country living under Jim Crow for several decades, after all. Was that when America was great? Obviously, a slam on Make America Great Again. It seems there is some deprogramming needed, although not for the whole 73.7 million. See, and then this is another thing. The differences I see, the left's number of conservatives who voted is lower than the conservatives, so who have a higher number. But he says 73.7 million. Apparently only about 50% still believe Trump won. That would be about, 37 million people. So how do you suggest the people who refuse to accept reality be dealt with, is what he is asking. How do you deal with them? And, the ones sending death threats to Georgia's Republican Secretary of State. Would milk and cookies help? Thoughts and prayers? Or do we wait until after SEAL Team 6 has to be sent into the White House to drag Trump out? Will that get them to come around? By the way, Georgia's recount just confirmed Biden's win there. Now, this is what he had to say, and this was about 13 hours ago. He wrote this. And I look at that and I say, that post, the stuff he just said is so laden with divisiveness that it couldn't possibly be used as a hallmark of what should be done to deprogram the people they disagree with, or to draw them back into the peaceful, loving, tolerant fold that they've obviously strayed from. And so I see this kind of stuff, and I saw somebody else responded to him and said, pretty much. People knee-jerk and, of course, make the worst of the suggestion, but seriously, what do we do with this level of disconnection from reality? Conspiracy has taken off at levels I've never experienced, and when you confront them, you get, see, this is why we don't want anything to do with you. I'm going to go load my gun. WTF, he says. And I said, that's an amazing stereotype you've incorporated into your argument. So that was my take on it. And a good friend, I just saw this on this post, a good friend who's more conservative answered to him and said, guns with an S. It's plural, and they're always loaded. Smiley face. So here's what you've got. You've got a nation divided. And this nation isn't divided because Trump, because Biden. There's something deeper that divides us. And by saying that you are part of the party that is there to end the divisiveness in America, to bring us all back together and unify us, because obviously that's not what the guy you was supporting for the last 4 years has done, is the hidden message there. So come over to us. We'll help reunite you. We'll bring you back into the fold. Yet they do this by saying that anybody who believes differently from them needs deprogramming. That's divisiveness all by itself. So I've got friends in there who I've known for many years. I've got friends who there was never division amongst us until there was a political fight. And I try to stay clear of that. I find I I don't disrespect anybody because they have a different political point of view. What I disrespect is when somebody wants to make your political point of view mean that you're stupider or dumber or less educated or less enlightened than they are. It's like, stow that bullshit. I don't need to hear that. I know what I believe, and I know what I want in life, and what I want, I prefer my friends to politics. I've lost friends, as I've mentioned before, over the last 3 years because of who I voted for and who they voted for. And I've never gone to anybody and said, we can't be friends anymore because of who you voted for. But I've sure had several people come to me and tell me they can't be my friend because of who I vote for. And I think I take a pretty even-keeled approach to what I preach politically. I don't go for the big, heavy-duty conspiracy theories, though somebody might say to you or to me, just believing that Trump has any chance of winning the election by doing these recounts and looking for fraud and doing all this, that all by itself is a conspiracy theory. I happen to disagree. I think anybody, and it's a constitutionally protected act, when you start looking at constitutionally protected voting laws and then constitutionally protected acts of challenging an election, it's all constitutionally protected. I'm not going to get into it. I'm trying to summarize it so I don't have to get into that too deeply. But you know what I mean. It's already a protected act. A president or a challenger can challenge the outcome of any election. Now, they'd be foolish if it was like 90% for one guy and 10% for the challenger, but when it's so close that in some places they can't even divide it by the vote by less than a percentage point, then it's probably a decent thing to challenge and find out what's going on. And then when there's red flags and people believe there's been fraudulent activity and impropriety, it opens a whole bunch of doors to do something else. But all of that to say, if that's the stuff that I'm seeing now is creating division. It's people are saying we voted a new president in, and he stands for peace and unity and getting rid of the divisiveness. But what it takes to get rid of the divisiveness for all of those people is for you to abandon what you believe. And so, is that really calling for tolerance, unity, peace, when you say the only way we can have peace is if you abandon your political ideologies? Now, I could see if your political ideology said, I must kill and cut off the heads and put them on pikes of all the people who disagree with me politically, yeah, you could end that, and that might bring a little less divisiveness. But we're just talking about political ideology here, politics. We're not talking about murder. So I wanted to get into this a bit, and one of the things that kind of prompted this as well, my agent, Italia Gandolfo, she's my literary agent, she had posted an article, and I reposted it over on my Facebook page. And I thought it was a very interesting article. It is an article that's entitled, Kurt Russell, the actor, thinks celebrities should step away from being vocally political. We are court jesters, he said. And so he thinks that celebrities should stick to their role as entertainers to better serve their acting. And Kurt Russell feels that celebrities should just keep their political views to themselves. Amen, Kurt Russell. I'm all for that. Though it's now common for celebrities to be involved politically, Russell still subscribes to the old school Hollywood rule of always being an entertainer to all audiences. Because what happens when you step out and you take a side? I look at a guy like Robert De Niro. Used to really like his acting. Now I can't see past his intolerance. I can't see past his bile and venom about Trump. Now, if I saw another actor having that bile and venom about the other opposing party, I would have just the same kind of feeling. Because you know what? That's not the stuff I need to hear. You can tell me If you're an actor and you say, yeah, well, I tend to be more conservative or whatever, so what? But when you start demeaning and wishing the death of and so on, that becomes something, for me, I gauged Robert De Niro by that. When he wished death on the president, I was pretty much done enjoying his movies. And that's all I can see when I see him anymore. And so that's problematic for me. But Kurt Russell, he went on to say here, he said, I've always been someone who felt we are court jesters, actors. That's what we do. He said alongside his longtime love Goldie Hawn in a joint interview for the new movie, they're doing a sequel to Christmas Chronicles where he played Santa Claus. He said, as far as I'm concerned, you should step away from saying anything so that you can still be seen by the audience in any character. He continued, there's no reason entertainers can't just learn as much as anybody else about a subject, whatever it is. But I think that's what's sad about it, is that they lose their status as a court jester. And I'm a court jester, he said. That's what I was born to do. And he goes on, and this article goes on and tells you more about this. And they get into talking about Reagan, who was an actor who became the president, and so on. And so you look at him, and he says, I know we can't live forever. I only wish she could have. Oh, that was Goldie Hawn speaking about Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Now, she doesn't come out and say where she stands politically, but she had a lot of respect for Ruth Bader Ginsburg, which people think, well, then she must be liberal. Well, not necessarily. I had a lot of respect for Ruth Bader Ginsburg, too. I didn't agree with everything she did, but I had respect for her. So you look at that stuff and you say, that's interesting. When you take sides and you're a public figure, especially in entertainment or sports or things like that, you tend to turn a lot of heads and sometimes change some minds. Or you could build up that wall of resentment from people who used to like what you do. And so that led me to trying to look into this whole thing about arguing politics with friends, about why we've become so divided and so on. And so I want to look at both of those things. Why have we become so divided? And how do we deal with friends who have differing political views from us? Most of the time when you make friends, you're paying attention to what you have in common. You might enjoy their sense of humor, their kindness, their taste in music, or their willingness to help you out in a pinch. Think of the friends that you have. And why do you have those friends, and why do you keep them close? What makes them your friend? Is it that they agree with you on everything? Is it that perhaps you can disagree on things and you're still friends? Like Polonius said to Hamlet in Shakespeare's Hamlet. He said, the friends thou hast and tried, grapple them to thy soul with hoops of steel. So the friends you've had, and you've put them, you've tried them. And what makes them stay your friends? Focusing on what you have in common and learning to avoid political conversations is going to help you deal with friends who don't share your own political views. When you do get into a disagreement, learning to patch things up is going to help your friendship endure. I had a very good friend, and I've mentioned it before. More than once I've mentioned this. Very good friend. We were creatives. We met in 1993 working on a creative project together. I was a creative director and a designer and an illustrator and artist. He was a puppet master amongst many other great talents he had. And I created puppets that he built like Muppet types of characters. And we hit it off right away. Then our wives hit it off. And we all started hanging out. We did a lot of stuff together. He and I had a little business together where we were selling Celtic goods, books and jewelry and swords and kilts and stuff like that. And so we were friends since 1993. And it was only a couple of years ago now that he ended our friendship because of the way I voted. Now, never before had politics been a divisive thing for us. We agreed, and I learned stuff from him on spirituality. He was a pagan. I don't think he's Wiccan, but he was pagan. And he was into the magics and all of that. I was into the paranormal and learning some of the stuff about pagan points of view and pagan things. And yet, it wasn't until we differed on who to vote for, and I never brought it up as a problem with him. He brought it up to me. It was never a topic we ever really talked about that much. He just didn't like the fact that I supported one particular guy, and so he ended our friendship of 25 years over that. And even though it had never been a topic that had been divisive for us before. So there are things that we can do when we have friends. And I got a few things here. I may just rattle them off before we end this first segment. Believe it or not, we're already coming up on the end of the first segment. Number one is practice hungry listening. When you're tolerating opposing political views, how do you do that? Number one, practice hungry listening. A good friend has sincere interest in finding out as much as they can about their friend's point of view. And if you're really sincere about staying involved in a friendship, open up your ears, stay interested in your friend's daily life, explore your friend's perspective, ask open-ended questions, think out loud about what your friend shares. Number two, be wary of blocked listening. Political beliefs are sensitive personal issues, and it's really easy to get emotional about them. So don't block out your friends. If you find yourself wanting to include the word but in your conversation, chances are you're engaged in blocked listening. Yeah, I hear you, but let me give it to you this way. Same for relationships, guys. So remember that telling people where they're wrong is likely going to change their minds or improve your relationship. Is unlikely. I'm sorry, I was going to say, what did I write there? It's unlikely to change anybody's mind by telling somebody that they're wrong. 3, don't try to change your friends' points of view. Just because your political beliefs are based on interpretation of facts, you won't be able to convince another person of your point of view by quoting respected experts or anything like that. So quoting experts, providing poll figures, blah, 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 blah. That all goes out the window. And so if it's an issue that's important to your values, it's enough to just let your friend know what your own beliefs are. Then you can move on from there. So 4 is avoid imposing your political beliefs on your friend. It's not fun to talk to somebody whose beliefs are fixed. Political conversations between friends aren't really about who's right and wrong. Instead, they're an opportunity to keep a good thoughtful mood going. And it's going to help to realize that political points of view are deeply connected to a person's sense of identity. You have to recognize that. And if you get so focused on winning the conversation, no one's going to have a good time. Instead of trying to change your friend's mind about a political topic, find ways to relax and enjoy the discussion. And then be mindful of your social media feed and agree to disagree. So there you go. Those are some things that we can do. I want to stop that there. We're going to end this first segment because we got to go out to break. We'll be right back. You guys sit tight. We'll talk about this a little bit more.
Are you looking for a really awesome and amazing graphic designer? How about an illustrator or a photographer? This is Rainey Roberts, and I wanted to tell you how you can get my designer, illustrator husband, Scotty Roberts, to work for you on your project. Do you have an awesome self-published book but no cover, or even worse, a cover that really sucks? Do you need a kick-ass logo for your company or some f***ing awesome graphic designs for your ads or website? Then get in touch with my husband for the best f***ing awesome kick-ass design and illustration. He knows his stuff, and he's been at this for more years than I've been alive. Go to ScottAllenRoberts.com. That's Scott with 2 T's, ALANROBERTS.com to take a look at his online portfolio of work, or call 651-468-8115. Now go out and kick some ass with some kick-ass graphic design.
Hire my dad so he can take me to Disneyland.
All right, guys, welcome back. Thanks for sitting on through the break. This is Scotty Roberts. You're watching and listening to my show, the Intrepid radio program, right here on the Odyssey Radio Network, where you can hear this show in its audio format at odysy1.com. Come on over and check out Odyssey Radio. And then come on over to my YouTube channel if you'd like to see the video simulcast of this show and join the live chat room going on right now over at youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. Now, let's carry on this thing about friendships, the things that we agree to disagree on, the things that break up friendships because we think one way or the other, arguing politics. But it all starts on this basis of why has America become so divided? There are 4 reasons why the United States doesn't seem so united anymore. What would you think those things are? And I found some pretty interesting quotes. One is by Senator John McCain from just a couple of years ago, just before he died. And some people who are conservatives say, I don't like McCain because he left the Conservative Party. I don't care. I want you to hear his words. We weaken our greatness when we confuse our patriotism with tribal rivalries that have sown resentment and hatred and violence in all the corners of the globe. We weaken it when we hide behind walls rather than tear them down. When we doubt the power of our ideals rather than trust them to be the great force for change they've always been. That's what happens. Now listen to this other quote. This is from Sting's song, Russians. He says, there is no monopoly of common sense on either side of the political fence. We share the same biology, regardless of ideology. Believe me when I say to you, I hope the Russians love their children too. That was written way back in 1985. And it's a song I used to really like of his. And so for many of us these days, it feels as if the United States has never been less united. The nation, it seems, has become irrevocably fractured. And it's all along these political and ideological lines. Are you a Republican? Are you a Democrat? Are you liberal? Are you conservative? Are you red or blue? Etc. And so sitting down for Thanksgiving with family is going to be interesting this year. Especially if you have family that's on differing sides of the table from you, politically speaking. And it's going to be more uncomfortable than ever. And the admonition to avoid discussing religion or politics in polite company has never been more apropos than it is right now. And, I love discussing politics. I love discussing religion even more. Not religion of, hey, come over to the dark side or the light side. No, I'm talking about, I love discussing history and archaeology and religious history and things like that. But what's happened to America? And how can we reverse this de-unified trend that seems to be there? And actually, it's all just a matter of perspective. We need to examine whether the country actually is divided. Do you think our country's divided, if I ask you right now? It's a trick question. So wait before you answer. Or does it merely seem divided? is there a difference there? Several articles have been written, books have been written, stories have been told all over the news over the past few years reminding us that despite the name, the U.S. has been divided for much of its existence. Indeed, it'd be hard to really argue that the country is more divided than it was during the Civil War. And in fact, the familiar proscription against discussing politics and religion in general company appeared at least as far back as a book of etiquette entitled Hill's Manual of Social and Business Forms that was published in 1879, just about 13 years after the end of the Civil War. And it could certainly be said that our current political unrest has nothing on the 1960s. So consequently, part of today's apparent divisiveness appears to be this matter of short-sighted perspective. Many of us who feel that the nation has never been so split have only been politically conscious for a few decades, and therefore have a pretty narrow timeline from which to compare. If Niall is over there in the chat room, he's somebody I want to talk to more, and we keep saying we're going to do this, and we haven't done it yet, but I want to do a series on the Troubles in Ireland, the Irish Republican Army, the division between Ireland and England, Ireland and the British. And you think that there is a political ideologies that have created a lengthy timeline of difference and division. You can take a look at how that's working out over there. So the problem we have is that we have ideologues without issues. There's good evidence that American political parties have become increasingly polarized over the past several decades. Democratic, Republican politicians disagreeing over policy more than ever. And you got to witness the headlines following the death of Senator John McCain when he died, whose quote we had at the beginning of this. It says there were a couple of articles written, one in the Wall Street Journal that said McCain and the Dying Art of Political Compromise. And on NPR, McCain's death marks the near extinction of bipartisanship. But what's less clear is whether political party division reflects division within the general public and American culture at large. So suffice it to say that the evidence is, divided. Now, a 2017 Pew Research Center poll of 5,000 U.S. adults. Now, this is a poll, and it's only 5,000 people, which is a 0.0001%, half of a percent of the nation. That a poll of about 5,000 U.S. adults reported that partisan divide over political issues related to racial discrimination, immigration, international diplomacy, and government aid to the needy has indeed widened significantly since the early 1990s. There was an average of 36% difference of opinion on these issues, up from just 15% in 1994, across party lines, based on those identifying as or leaning to either Democrats or Republicans. And this gap dwarfed divisions across the differences in age, gender, race, education, and church attendance. These results indicate that for those who affiliate with a political party, polarization over the issues, quote unquote, does seem to have increased over the past 20 to 30 years. And many of us are going to answer that by saying, duh, isn't that the truth? We all see that now every day. But a 2012 study by Stanford University, their political science professor, Shanto Iyengar. I hate these. You think the ancient names are tough to say. Iyengar. Iyengar. And colleagues. They offered another way of looking at this apparent split. It examined political polarization from a different angle, not from how Americans stand on policy issues, but from the perspective of affect, A-F-F-E-C-T, affect, how they feel about those on the other side of the political fence. So, drawing from a survey data that spanned several decades, the study found that the feelings of those who affiliate as a Democrat or Republican toward members of the opposing party have become increasingly negative since the late 1980s. And the general pattern of dislike was mirrored by other specific metrics of social distance: disapproval of one's child marrying someone from the opposing party, as well as the attribution of negative stereotypes. In other words, closed-mindedness, hypocritical, selfish, mean, to those of the opposing party, both of which have increasingly sharpened since the 1960s. Curiously, this affect polarization wasn't so much related to ideology, where one stood on a political issue, as much as partisan identity per se. It wasn't so much that they had differences of opinion on the way something should be conducted or the stance somebody should have on a given issue. It was, how dare you cross the line and marry someone who's a Democrat? We're Republicans, or vice versa. You get the idea. So it's almost got the stigma that interracial marriage had several decades ago. So in a more recent study that was published entitled Ideologies Without Issues, The Polarizing Consequences of Ideological Identities, the University of Maryland professor Liliana Mason extended Iyinger's findings by distinguishing between two separate aspects of political ideology: issue-based, and that's defined by what one believes about the issues, and identity-based, which we've heard a lot of that of late, defined by one's social identity or party affiliation. So in Dr. Mason's examination of political survey data, by far the more potent predictor of social distance was identity-based ideology, identity politics. Who are you voting for? Are you a Biden guy? Are you a Trump guy? Etc. So how we identify ourselves as Democrats or liberals as opposed to Republicans or conservatives, not where we stand on the issues. So it has very little to do with where you stand nowadays on the issues, and more to do with who you are affiliated with. So collectively, it's like my old friend who disowned me as a friend due to the personality difference, who I voted for. Didn't ask me about any issues. Just said that because of who I voted for. So collectively, these results indicate that it's the social identifying role of ideological affiliation that's paramount in guiding all these negative emotional responses to those on the other side of the political fence. And this conclusion helps us to understand a few seemingly puzzling aspects of politics today. For example, how politicians can pivot on the issues when running for office, and how key components of traditional party platforms can sometimes turn on a dime. Think of the GOP in Russia. Think of the Democrats in China. And why hypocrisy seems to run rampant in politics today. And you notice people aren't usually divided, or they're divided because of your political identity differences. So for much of the voting public, political affiliation isn't so much about the issues as it is about being part of Team Red or Team Blue. I'm for the blue wave. I'm a donkey, or an ass, as I would say. Or I'm an elephant. I'm a GOP. So opposed between us and them, liberals become libtards, conservatives become fascists. And the possibility of finding common ground flies out the window altogether. Because you're liberal, you're a libtard. You can't think. Because you're conservative, you're fascist. Conservative is almost synonymous with white supremacist nowadays. Have you noticed that? So, as a New York University philosophy professor, Kwame Anthony Appiah, recently put it, all politics is identity politics. You can take that one with you. That one's for free. Take that home with you. All politics is identity politics. I'm going to put that on a t-shirt. All politics is identity politics. Now, what about this whole thought of being an enemy of the people? He is an enemy of the people. On its own, the conclusion that we're ideologues without issues doesn't explain why political polarization has increased over the past several decades. But the studies we were just quoting supply a clue with the additional finding that increasing affect polarization was correlated with increasingly negative political campaigning over time. Negative political campaign ads. I said, I think we should have a rule that says you can't mention the other guy when you're campaigning against him. All you can do is promote. I don't know how many times I said during this election, I don't want to hear how you feel about the other guy you're running against. I want to know what you're going to do. What are your actions going to be? And many times that got lost in the identity politicking. And so there was increased polarization was correlated directly with increasingly negative political campaigning. Now, noting the relationship between negative campaigning and the press coverage, the study authors wrote that negative, but not positive, messages are recycled ad infinitum that go on forever by journalists who seek conflict and controversy above all else. The sensational news, they've got to have it. And that technology has facilitated citizens' ability to seek out information sources they find agreeable and tune out the others that prove dissonant to them. In other words, campaign muckraking appears to increase affect polarization, while press coverage of that conflict fans the flames of confirmation bias. Boom! Do you see that? Do you get that? Have you experienced that and things that you observe and see? So confirmation bias is to believe belief formation as location is to real estate. Let me restate that. Confirmation bias is to belief formation what location is to real estate. It's one of the most powerful determinants, if not the most powerful determinant, of how we consolidate our beliefs when consuming information. We talked about this not long ago, about the way we consume information and regurgitate that in social media. This is a well-tread theme. And over the past several decades, the proliferation of cable news networks, 24/7 news, options for online information, the increased intermingling of opinion and news, and a click-based revenue model. We talked about that before, the click-based revenue model. All they're trying to do is get you to click because that's how they earn money. They don't care if you read the article or not. You click on their sensationalized headline, and that earns them money. Even the biggies that are out there. So the click-based revenue model incentivizes sensationalism. And that's resulted in a kind of confirmation bias on steroids. Or crack, however you'd like to look at that. So for informational consumers. So with Republicans relying on, places like Fox News and outlets like that, and Democrats on CNN or The Daily Show, which is now defunct. So how about Politically Incorrect? Now, what's his new show now? You know who I mean. Bill Maher. Anyway, with Republicans relying stereotypically on one source and Democrats stereotypically on another source as the go-tos for their political news, no wonder there's disdain for members of the opposing party that's running absolutely wild and unchecked. I look at a guy like Keith Olbermann. I used to hear some of the stuff he'd say every now and then when he was on MSNBC. That guy is, he's planting bombs everywhere. He is one of the most negative people I know as far as creating this whole idea of confirmation bias and muckraking and all of that. So another study published earlier this year by Texas Tech University professor Brian McLaughlin provides this additional insight regarding the contributing role of the media in the political polarization of the country. In this survey-based study, Dr. McLaughlin exposed a national sample of Democrats and Republicans to a fabricated news story covering the results of a 2013 Pew Research study. The poll results were manipulated to expose subjects to two different story versions that either emphasized or de-emphasized U.S. political polarization, with a third control condition that involved no exposure to any story. So those who watched the news story that emphasized political polarization reported a subsequent increase in the perception of conflict as well as a measure of affect polarization that combined in group favoritism and social distance. Go figure. And the perception of conflict, in turn, mediated effects on increasing partisan identification, affiliating with Democrat or Republican, and ideological polarization, affiliating as liberal or conservative. These novel findings suggest that when partisans are exposed to news about political conflict, they tend to circle their ideological wagons, and they steel themselves against the all-seeing eye. And they really part ways with trying to see eye to eye with anybody from the other side of the aisle. So objective news reporting is the antithesis of the enemy of the people. But selective exposure to political biased news and news in general that highlights political conflict can fuel the fire of political polarization in what amounts to this vicious cycle that we see ourselves in now. Get that? Objective news reporting is the antithesis to the enemy of the people. What have we seen in the news these days? Who really reports the news anymore? Everybody has to state their opinion, their damned opinion. Journalism is supposed to be objective. You're supposed to float above the fray and report the facts as you see them. Just the facts, ma'am. But we're seeing now news reporting is really the stoking of the political flames. And it creates this vicious cycle. It's kind of like, it's the Russians, stupid. Now, there's no discussion of modern political polarization is complete without mention of the contribution of Russian trolls and bots on the internet to foment American dissatisfaction with life in a multicultural, free society. And now, it's now well established that Russia attempted to influence the results of the 2016 U.S. presidential election through the propagation of online information, misinformation. We know that. We've known that since the 40s or the 50s, that the communists in Russia were doing everything they could to undermine our elections. This ain't nothing new. All that's new is the technology by which they tried to do it. Of course, whether it did influence the election and to what extent that collusion occurred, which we found was zero, and by whom remains a matter of partisan debate. You notice that is one of those issues that is amongst the affect polarization. This whole Russian, I still see people today. They'll go, yeah, Trump can go to hell with all his Russian buddies who are going to try to win the election for him. And I want to say, and I have said, are you that behind the times? There was no, the Russians attempted to. The Chinese attempted to. Everybody who's a major player in the world on the global scale tries to affect everybody else's elections for their good. Did they accomplish that? That's the big question. Here in the United States, probably not. But we'll never know what some influence does. Influence, maybe. Collusion? No. So, just as in recent months, there was a study published that found that Russian bots on Twitter have also been weighing in on the debate over the vaccines, with bots significantly more likely to tweet about vaccines against coronavirus in general, with both pro and anti-vaccination messages than the average Twitter user. Now, this finding is consistent with the theory that the intent of Russian trolls operating under the political direction of the Kremlin is to sow the seeds of American discord. It's not to convince anybody to think one way or the other. It's to sow the seeds of discord and disharmony and disunity. So, coupled with McLaughlin's findings, that being exposed to apparent evidence of political polarization, regardless of the reality of it, increases political polarization. And it can be rightly said that reporting about polarization has the potential to be used as a political weapon. Yet news of Russian influence on American polarization reminds us that we may not be as irreconcilably divided as it might seem from our online interactions. Remember how I kind of started this section of this? Is saying you might be surprised that there is maybe not as much division as there is perceived division. So, the big question hangs in the air. Can the United States ever be united again? And the big question, should there be 75 million people in our nation that should be deprogrammed in order to make that unity come about? So is there hope for Americans to move forward together as a country when there's so much division over personality or party affiliation? It lies in the promise that democracy can bring those from different cultures and disparate viewpoints to the same table where they can work collaboratively based on a larger shared identity and the greater common good. We are a republic that has a constitution that guarantees our rights, and one of our rights is democracy. We have democracy. We are not a democracy. So much of what we know or think we know about political polarization is based on polls and surveys that force respondents into dichotomous choices that may fail to capture the complexity of how people actually feel and think. In reality, many partisans have more nuanced views than one might assume. Just as apparent moderates might have extreme opinions that are inconsistent with this underlying party platform, and therefore they cancel each other out. It's like conservatives who are pro-choice, liberals who are pro-life. Gives you an idea. So, in and around 2016, Ken Stern, who was a former NPR CEO and the author of Republican Like Me, How I Left the Liberal Bubble and Learned to Love the Right, set out across the country and went to evangelical churches, shot a hog in Texas, stood in a pit row at NASCAR race, and hung out at Tea Party meetings, and in order to better understand conservative America. And what he found based on face-to-face interactions was that Americans aren't as divided as you might think. Although he encountered some less than attractive types along the way, he was almost always able to find more points of agreement and commonality than anyone thought was possible. So the anecdotal nature of Stern's trip and the criticisms of his cultural tourism as a white male aside, his experience highlights the possibility that political partisans can indeed find common ground when it is sought during in-person interactions. So there you go. That's where we got to end because we're out of time. Be here on Sunday morning at 9 o'clock a.m. Central, 10 a.m. Eastern for It's Sunday. And my lovely wife, Rainey, will be joining us. And other than that, you guys have a good night and a good Saturday. We'll see you on Sunday morning.